For more than 20 years, in almost every single episode, Peter Griffin's shirt has been buttoned the wrong way, closing like a woman's shirt instead of a man's. Hardly anyone has ever noticed. That one tiny slip is only the beginning. Hidden in the corners of this loud, messy cartoon are thousands of quiet secrets, jokes buried inside fake newspapers, faces borrowed from other shows, mistakes the people who made it never bothered to fix, sitting right there in plain sight, waiting. Family Guy is far stranger and far more carefully stuffed than it ever lets on. A show built to slowly reward anyone patient enough to look closely. Over the next few hours, we are going to drift through all of it together. Every hidden Easter egg and every big mistake, from a street named after the creator to the night the show killed off the family dog. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and let your eyes fall shut.
Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's get into it. The house on Spooner Street. Almost every Family Guy story begins and ends in the same place. A tall yellow house with a bright red door sitting on a calm little street in a town called Quahog. The street is Spooner Street, and after enough years of watching, that house starts to feel as familiar as a place you grew up in. You know where the green couch is. You know which way Peter walks to get a beer. You could probably draw the front of the house from memory. The town around it is completely made up. There is no real Quahog anywhere in Rhode Island, even though the show acts like there is. The name itself hides a small joke that most people never catch. A quahog is a type of clam, the hard kind with the thick shell that gets buried in the sand at the beach. So the whole town is quietly named after a clam. That is also where the men's favorite bar gets its name, since they spend half their lives at a place called the Drunken Clam. A bar named after a clam in a town named after a clam. The joke sits there in plain sight and the show never stops to point it out. The man who created the show, Seth MacFarlane, went to art school in Rhode Island, and a lot of the show's flavor comes from that part of the country. To make the fake town feel a little more real, the people who draw the show sometimes slip actual Rhode Island buildings into the background. If a wide shot of the neighborhood shows tall buildings far off in the distance, some of those are real towers from the city of Providence drawn into the cartoon sky. A made-up town with a real skyline behind it. That little mix of fake and real is the first sign of something this whole video is going to keep running into. Family Guy plays loose with its own world, and it does it on purpose. Now for the part that trips up even careful fans. Ask most people where the Griffins live, and they will tell you the address right away. 31 Spooner Street.
The show says it out loud more than once. In one episode that takes place in Boston, Stewie even gives the full address with the zip code attached, the way you would write it on an envelope. 31 Spooner Street, Quahog, Rhode Island. That is the address the show settled on, and that is the one fans have learned by heart. Here is the thing the show would rather you forget. That address has not always been 31. Go all the way back to the very first episode, the one that started everything. There is a moment where a check arrives in the mail for the family. The plot of that whole episode hangs on that check, so the camera shows it clearly, and the address printed on it is not 31 Spooner Street. It says 72 Spooner Street. Same street, completely different number. Most people watch that episode and never freeze the picture long enough to read the small print, so the slip just floats by. Then it happens again.
In another early episode, one that follows Brian the dog, there is a scene where Peter writes a letter. The return address gets shown on screen, the spot in the corner where you write where the letter came from. That address reads 725 Spooner Street. Now the family has lived at 3 different numbers on the same street. 72 near the start, 725 a little later, and 31 once the show finally made up its mind. 3 addresses, 1 house, and the show never once explains it or even seems to notice. This is a good moment to slow down and look at what is really going on, because it explains so much of what comes later. The house in Family Guy is not treated like a fixed, solid place. It is treated like a stage that the writers can rearrange whenever a joke needs it to be different. The address can change because nobody behind the show is keeping a careful list of these things. They care about the joke in front of them. The number on the envelope is just a detail in the background, so it gets whatever number the artist happened to type that day. That loose attitude is the soil that both the hidden jokes and the mistakes grow out of. They come from the same place. You can see that same loose attitude in the shape of the house itself, and this one is fun because once it is pointed out, it is impossible to stop seeing. The outside of the Griffin home is built in an old New England style, the kind with a sloped roof where the top floor tucks up under the slant. If you look at the front of the house, the upstairs clearly
clearly has angled, leaning walls, the way a real house like that would. The roof comes down at a tilt on both sides. That is how the building looks from the street. But then the show takes you inside the upstairs rooms, into Peter and Lois's bedroom, into Chris's room, into Stewie's nursery. And every single one of those rooms has tall, straight, flat walls that go straight up and down, no slant.
No angle, no leaning ceiling tucked under the roof. The inside of the house simply does not match the outside of the house. There is no real building on Earth that could look like that. The rooms upstairs would not fit inside the roof we see from the street. It is a small thing, and it would be easy to miss, but once you know to check, the whole house stops making sense. The drawers and beds and walls inside belong to a different building than the one we see from the curb. The house does not just bend its own shape, it bends the rules of where it even exists. For a long stretch of the show, the Griffin home did not appear on any map of the town at all, almost like it was hiding. That actually became the center of one of the most famous early episodes. The family tries to do something simple, just put in a swimming pool, and to do that, they need a permit. When the town goes to check their paperwork, they discover that the land the house sits on was never officially made part of the United States. The house is technically on its own little patch of nothing. So Peter does what only Peter would do. He declares the house its own country. He names it Pretoria. For a short while, the Griffin home is not a house in America at all. It is a separate nation with its own flag, sitting on Spooner Street. The whole strange story only works because the show treats its own home as something flexible, something it can redraw the borders of whenever it wants a wild idea to play out. Even the way the family got the house keeps shifting. In one episode, the show jokes that they ended up with the place after a lawsuit. In a later episode, Lois flatly tells Peter that they are renting, which does not line up with all the times Peter has bragged about owning the place or sold off the deed in some get-rich-quick scheme. Own it, rent it, win it, lose it. The house belongs to the family in whatever way the story of the week needs it to. None of these versions are trying to fit together. Each one just serves the joke in that episode and then gets forgotten. While the show keeps quietly tripping over its own house, it also slips little gifts into the neighborhood for the fans who pay close attention. Walk one street over from Spooner Street, and there is a road with a name that sounds almost normal until you say it slowly. McFar Lane. Say those two words together and you can hear it. McFarlane. The man who made the whole show tucked his own last name into the map of the town, hidden in plain sight as an ordinary street sign. It is the kind of thing that sits in the background of a shot for a second and then is gone. Most people drive right past it, but it is there. A quiet little signature from the creator, stitched into the streets right next to the family's home. There is one more piece to the house, and it is the kind of joke that only the most dedicated fans ever find, because it does not even live inside an episode. On the extra commentary track that comes with one of the later seasons, where the makers of the show talk over the episode, they have Peter himself speak as if the house is a real place you could visit. He claims the real Griffin house is actually in Burbank, California, which is the real town where a lot of cartoons are actually made. And then he complains that fans keep coming by and stealing the mailbox. None of that is true, of course. It is a joke layered on top of a joke. The pretend dad of a pretend family pretending his pretend house is real and that real people keep robbing it. It is the show winking at how badly fans want all of this to be real and gently teasing them for it. When you put all of these pieces side by side, a picture forms, and it is the picture that the whole rest of this video is built on. The Griffin house is the heart of the show, the place everything returns to, and yet the show cannot keep its own facts straight about it. The address has been 3 different numbers, the shape of the building is impossible, the house has been its own country, has been rented, has been owned, has vanished off the map, and has been jokingly placed in California. And right alongside all of those slips, the show buries little treats, like a street named after its creator, waiting for the people patient enough to look. That is the strange thing about Family Guy that makes a video like this possible. The hidden jokes and the honest mistakes are not opposites. They grow out of the very same habit. A show that does not worry too much about keeping every detail perfect is also a show loose enough to drop a secret into the corner of a shot just for fun. The carelessness that lets the address change is the same playfulness that hides McFar Lane on the map. Two sides of one coin, both sitting right there on Spooner Street, both easy to miss, both waiting in the background of a house you thought you already knew everything about. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the house keeps its secrets and keeps its slip-ups, all in the same quiet yellow building. But the house is only the shell. The real treasures, and the real mistakes, live in the people inside it, and the show makes one small drawing slip on the family themselves over and over in nearly every single episode, so often that once it gets pointed out, it becomes very hard to look away from. Section 2. The family inside the house. The house is only paint and walls. The reason anyone keeps coming back is the family living inside it, and the show makes a quiet little drawing mistake on them in nearly every single episode that almost nobody catches the first 100 times around. It sits right on the front of Peter Griffin in the middle of the screen in scene after scene after scene. Once it gets pointed out, it is very hard to ever look away from again. It has to do with his shirt. Peter wears the same plain white button-up shirt almost all the time, and the buttons on that shirt are done up the wrong way. In real life, men's shirts and women's shirts close in opposite directions. On a man's shirt, the left side folds over the right. On a woman's shirt, it is the other way around, with the right side folding over the left. This is just how shirts have been made for a very long time. Peter's shirt closes the way a woman's shirt closes, the wrong way for a man. The same direction as the shirt Lois wears. It is the kind of detail that the people drawing the show were never thinking hard about, and so it slipped through and then stayed. Year after year, episode after episode, the main character of the whole show walks around with his shirt buttoned backward. Every so often, very rarely, it gets drawn the correct way by accident, which somehow makes it stranger. The mistake is not even steady. It is wrong almost always, and then suddenly right for no reason, and then wrong again. Peter has been on television for more than 20 years, and for most of that time, the front of his own shirt has been a small slip that the show simply never bothered to fix. That one is steady and easy to find once you know where to look. The next one is the opposite. It flickers, it comes and goes, and it is the single most common drawing mistake in the entire show. It happens to the eyebrows. In Family Guy, the eyebrows do a lot of work. They float above the eyes as their own little shapes, and the artists move them around to show how a character feels. Raised eyebrows for surprise, lowered ones for anger. Because the eyebrows sit slightly apart from the rest of the face, they are easy to lose track of while drawing thousands of frames, so they break a lot. Sometimes a character's eyebrows simply vanish for a moment, leaving a strangely smooth, blank forehead. Sometimes they fade until they are see-through, like a ghost of an eyebrow. And once in a while, the show does the truly odd thing and draws a second pair, so a character ends up with two sets of eyebrows stacked on their face at once. There are clear examples scattered all through the early years, if you slow the show down and watch the foreheads. In one episode, where Death himself shows up, Lois's rich father Carter is in the middle of talking about a large sum of money, and right at that moment, his eyebrows are missing entirely. They are simply not there. A second later, they pop back as if nothing happened. In one of the very first episodes, a big angry man on a bus is about to start a fight with Peter, and as the man turns and runs off the bus, his eyebrows turn clear and transparent mid-step. The forehead keeps moving, while the eyebrows quietly disappear. These are not big, loud mistakes. A person watching at normal speed, laughing at the joke, will almost never spot a missing eyebrow. That is exactly why they survive. The show moves fast, the jokes come quickly, one on top of the next, and the eye is always being pulled to whatever is funny, rather than to a forehead in the corner of the frame. The mistakes hide inside the speed. Slow everything down, though, and the foreheads of Quahog turn into a strange, flickering show all their own, with eyebrows blinking in and out across the whole town. There is something almost gentle about how many of these slips there are. They are not signs of a lazy show, so much as signs of a show being made very fast by people drawing an enormous number of pictures. A cartoon needs many drawings for even a few seconds of movement. Multiply that across a full episode, then a full season, then more than 20 years, and small slips are bound to gather like dust in the corners. The wonder is not that the eyebrows break sometimes. The wonder is that the family looks as steady as it does. The family itself holds another secret, and this one is not a mistake at all. It is just a fact most people never stop to think about. A huge part of the family is played by one single person. Seth MacFarlane, the man who created the show, is also the voice of 4 of its biggest characters. He is Peter, the dad. He is Brian, the talking dog. He is Stewie, the baby. And he is Quagmire, the neighbor with the strange laugh. 4 very different voices, 4 very different people on screen, all coming out of the same person standing at the same microphone. Once that sinks in, certain scenes turn into something amazing to listen to. Anytime Peter is sitting on the couch arguing with Brian, while Stewie says something rude from the floor, that is one man having a full conversation with himself, switching back and forth between the voices in a single breath. He chose to do it that way on purpose. He felt it would be simpler to make the voices himself than to teach someone else how to copy the sounds he already heard in his head when he first dreamed up the characters. The voice of Peter has a small, real-life starting point too. Before the show existed, MacFarlane was a student at an art school in Rhode Island. While he was there, he overheard
overheard a security guard talking, and something about the way that guard spoke stuck with him. That rolling, loud, slightly goofy way of talking became the seed for Peter's voice. So the sound that millions of people now know better than some of their own relatives traces back to one ordinary guard talking near a college who never knew he was being listened to. He had no idea he was about to live forever inside a cartoon dad. While the men of the house mostly kept their sounds from the very start, one member of the family quietly changed her voice early on, and most fans never noticed the swap. Meg, the daughter, was played by one young actress for the very first season of the show. After that first season, the part was handed to a different young actress, and she has played Meg ever since. The new voice became the only Meg most people have ever known. If you go back to the oldest episodes and listen closely, Meg sounds just a little bit different, a little off from the voice locked in your memory. The face is the same, the character is the same, the sound underneath has been swapped out, smoothly enough that the change slides right past you. That swap is a nice example of how this show hides things in plain hearing as well as in plain sight. The eyebrows flicker and you do not see it. The shirt buttons the wrong way and you do not see it. Meg's voice changes hands and you do not hear it. All of it is sitting there in the open, fully visible and fully audible, protected only by how fast the show moves and how busy it keeps your attention. The family, then, is held together about as loosely as the house they live in. Peter's shirt is drawn backward more often than not. Eyebrows wink out across the whole cast. One man quietly plays a third of the family. The daughter's voice was traded for a new one before most fans had even settled in. None of these things were meant to be noticed. They were meant to live in the background, while the jokes did the heavy lifting up front. And for the most part, that is exactly where they have stayed, tucked under the laughter, waiting for someone patient enough to slow the whole thing down and look. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Here is the part that makes this show different from a show that simply makes mistakes by accident. The people behind Family Guy figured out fairly early that some fans really do slow it down, that some people pause it, rewind it, and comb through the corners of every frame, hunting for exactly these kinds of hidden things. And rather than ignore those fans, the show decided to leave a message for them, buried inside a newspaper, written for the eyes of the only people who would ever stop the picture long enough to read it. Section 3. The jokes made for people who pause. The show moves fast, and that speed hides two very different things. It hides the accidental slips, the missing eyebrows and the backward shirt, the mistakes nobody meant to leave in. It also hides a second kind of thing, and this kind was put there on purpose. Tucked into the corners of certain scenes are little jokes that were drawn carefully, placed deliberately, and then buried so deep in the background that they only exist for one type of person, the person who stops the picture. The people who make the show learned early on that a slice of their fans would freeze the screen and read every sign, every paper, every label in the frame. So they started leaving things behind, written just for them. The clearest example of this lives inside a newspaper. In one episode, the Griffin family wins a boat race, which is a big deal for them, and the next thing they know, they're in the local paper. The family crowds around to look at their photo, thrilled to see themselves in print. The camera shows the newspaper page clearly enough that anyone curious could try to read it. Most people just glance at the big picture of the happy family and move on with the story. But for a viewer who stops the picture and actually reads the page, there is a second, smaller headline sitting near the bottom. It reads, "DVDs paused for headline joke. Millions disappointed." Take a moment to feel how clever that is. The only way to read that headline is to pause the show and study a newspaper in the background. And the headline itself is making fun of the exact person who would pause the show to study a newspaper in the background. It is a trap built out of words. The joke can only be found by the very people the joke is about. Anyone watching at normal speed sails right past it and never knows it exists. The careful viewer leans in, freezes the frame, reads the small print, and discovers that the show was waiting there to gently tease them for doing it. The show saw its own most devoted fans coming and left a little note for them at the bottom of a fake newspaper. That same trick, hiding a joke that only a frozen frame can catch, shows up on a license plate too. In one episode, Peter ends up inside the hotel suite of the actor Mel Gibson, and while snooping around, he finds a fake movie. It is a pretend sequel to a famous, very serious film about Jesus, except this pretend version is silly, more like a loud action movie with Jesus as the hero. The whole thing flies by in seconds. In the middle of it, there is a shot of Jesus driving a car. On the back back of that car is a license plate, and the letters on the plate read WWID. There is a well-known saying among some Christians, the question, "What would Jesus do?" often shortened to its first letters. The plate twists that saying. Since Jesus himself is the one driving, the question changes to, "What would I do?" It is a tiny, quick wink, gone almost before it appears, readable only if the picture stops at the right instant. Both of these jokes share the same shape. They are written in real words, placed in plain view, and then hidden by speed alone. The show does not blur them or shrink them past reading.
It simply lets them blast by so quickly that at normal pace, your brain never registers them as anything more than background clutter. The reward goes to patience. Slow down, and the corners of Quahog start talking. This habit comes from something deeper in the show, which is that Family Guy has always acted like it knows it is a show. The characters, every so often, behave as if they are aware that millions of people are watching them through a screen. They make comments about their own jokes, they complain about how the story is going, they mention the network airing the show, or the length of an episode, or how a certain plot makes no sense. Most cartoons pretend the world inside the screen is real, and that no one is watching. Family Guy does the opposite. It keeps reminding you that everyone involved knows exactly what this is. Nowhere is that clearer than in how the show treats the people who hate it. From the very beginning, Family Guy got into trouble. Its jokes were rude, dark, and often went after things other shows would never touch. One group in particular, a watchdog group whose job was to flag television they found offensive, went after the show again and again. They named it the worst show of the week dozens of separate times over the years and pushed for it to be punished. The show knew all about this, and rather than hide from it, the show baked it into a joke. In one episode, Peter looks straight out at the angry viewers at home and tells them that if they want to complain, they should send their letters to a group he calls the Family Television Council, even helpfully giving out a mailing address. The name is a twist on the real group that kept attacking the show. The show took its own hate mail, the real anger of real people who wanted it canceled, and turned it into a punchline pointed right back at them. The same self-awareness shows up in tiny print at the bottom of the screen. Now and then the show drops a little bubble of text or a line of words across the frame, written like a fact pulled from a trivia card, except the fact is about the show itself. In one episode, a small note appears on screen pointing out that fans went wild when one of the main characters had died, a real thing that had really happened to real viewers. The show reached out of its own story to comment on how its audience had reacted to its own past. It is a strange little mirror, the show watching the people who watch it and then writing down what it saw in the corner of the picture. There is an even bolder version of this trick, where the show uses that tiny text to talk about the real world outside the cartoon. In one episode, several characters are shown reading newspapers about real, serious news involving powerful people and crimes. As the scene plays, a line of words appears at the bottom, telling the viewer that this part was written months earlier, naming the actual month, and then asking the audience a direct question about whether what the show guessed had come true by the time they were watching. That is a remarkable thing for a cartoon to do. It is the show admitting, in fine print, that there is a long gap between when an episode is written and when it finally airs, and then turning that gap into a little game with the audience. Only someone reading the small text would ever catch it. All of these things, the newspaper trap, the license plate, the complaints aimed at the show's own enemies, the trivia bubbles, the time-stamped notes, point to one truth about Family Guy. This is a show that has always been deeply aware of being watched. It knows it has fans who freeze the frame. It knows it has critics who count its sins. It knows there is a screen between the cartoon and the couch. And instead of pretending otherwise, it fills the edges of its own world with little messages for both crowds, the lovers and the haters alike. So now there are two separate types of hidden things living in this show, and they are easy to confuse, but worth keeping apart. There are the accidents, the slips that snuck through because the show is made so fast. And there are the planted jokes, the ones drawn on purpose and tucked into the background as a gift or a tease for the people who look closest. Both kinds survive for the very same reason. The show runs by too quickly for the eye to keep up. The mistakes hide in that speed. The secrets hide in it too. The only way to tell them apart is to slow everything down and study the frame, which is exactly the thing the Boat Race newspaper was making fun of in the first place. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One of those little trivia bubbles, the one about fans going wild, points to something that was no small background gag at all. It points to the night the show did the unthinkable and killed off one of its main characters for real, sending its fans into an uproar that spilled far past the screen. The story of that death, and of how shockingly fast it was undone, is one of the strangest strangest true things that ever happened to this cartoon. Section 4. The Death and Return of Brian. For most of its life, this show followed one quiet rule. Nothing that happens ever truly sticks. A character can be blown up, shot, set on fire, or dropped off a building, and by the next scene, they are fine again, walking around as if none of it ever happened. There are no real wounds in Quahog. Pain is a punchline, and then it is gone. Brian, the family dog, lived inside that rule more than anyone. He had been beaten, burned, choked, and shot over the years, and he always strolled back into the next episode without a scratch. The world had taught everyone watching that the people in this town simply do not stay hurt. Late in the year 2013, in an episode called Life of Brian, the show broke its own rule. The setup seemed harmless. Earlier in that same episode, Stewie, the baby, had decided to destroy his time machine for good after one of his trips through time went badly wrong. He smashed the one device in the whole show that could rewind a bad day. With that out of the way, he and Brian went outside the house to set up a game of street hockey, the kind kids play in the road. Stewie stepped back inside for a moment to grab something, and while Brian stood alone in the street, a car came speeding through and struck him. The driver did not stop. The car was never identified, never caught, never explained. It simply hit the dog and vanished. Brian did not die right away. He was rushed to the animal hospital, and the family gathered around him while the doctors tried to save him. Then, with Peter and Lois and the children all standing close, Brian quietly died. The show played the whole thing straight. There was almost no joke to soften it. No silly twist arrived to undo it before the credits. The episode simply ended with the dog gone and the family grieving, which was a thing this show had never really done before with anyone who mattered. The cruelest part sat in the timing. The one character who could have fixed this was Stewie, because Stewie owned a time machine. He could have stepped back a single minute and pulled Brian out of the road, but he had just smashed that machine to pieces earlier in the very same episode. The escape hatch was destroyed by his own hands minutes before the worst thing happened, so the death felt locked in place. There was no button left to press. Then came the part that turned grief into anger. The Griffins got a new dog. His name was Vinny, an Italian dog with a thick, tough way of speaking, voiced by a well-known actor famous for playing a gangster on a mob show. Vinny moved into the house and took Brian's spot on the couch. He was friendly enough, and he even helped Stewie through his sadness, but he was not Brian. He had none of Brian's sharp mind, none of his long history with the family, none of the years of memories. To the people watching at home, it looked like the show had killed their favorite character and then shoved a stranger into his chair, as if a dog could simply be swapped out like a worn tire. The reaction was enormous, and it spilled far beyond the television. People who had spent years laughing at this show were suddenly heartbroken and furious over the death of a cartoon dog. Online, fans started up petitions, the kind where strangers sign their names to demand something change. One of those petitions, asking the show to bring Brian back to life, gathered more than 120,000 signatures. More than 100,000 people put their names down to save a drawing of a dog. Many of them were just as angry about the new dog as they were about the old one dying. The grief was real, even though Brian had never been real at all. It is worth sitting with how strange that is. Brian was a character on a comedy famous for being rude and silly, yet his death struck people somewhere genuine. The reason is that Brian had quietly become the heart of the show. He was the one who tried to act sensible while everyone around him fell apart. He had a different bond with each member of the family, and his friendship with Stewie, the baby, had grown over the years into something that felt close and true. Brian carried a huge share of the show's better moments. Pulling him out left a hole that the audience felt right away, and a new dog could not patch it over. Here is the thing the angry fans did not know while they were signing those petitions. Brian was always coming back. The whole death was a planned trick from the very start. Television episodes are written and drawn many months before they ever reach a screen. So by the time Brian's death aired, the people behind the show had long since finished writing the episode that would undo it. The return was sitting on a shelf, already made, while fans across the world thought their dog was gone forever. The man who created the show went online while the death episode was still airing on one side of the country, and as good as admitted the whole thing. He poked fun at how upset everyone was getting, and made clear that of course they would never really get rid of Brian. Behind the scenes, the bosses of the show had described the death as a fun way to shake things up. The show had been losing a slice of its viewers, and a shock like this was a way to get the whole world talking about Family Guy again. It worked perfectly. Everyone talked. The cleverest piece of all was hidden inside the death episode itself. In that same Life of Brian, there was a tiny, easy-to-miss moment where a past version of Stewie had used his time machine to jump forward in time, just to beat the holiday crowds and grab new Christmas Christmas toys early. At the time, it looked like a throwaway gag, the kind of joke the show forgets in 10 seconds. It was actually the key to the whole rescue, planted in plain sight, waiting to be used later. The way out of Brian's death was buried in the very episode that killed him. A few weeks later, the show brought him home. The episode was called Christmas Guy, and only a couple of episodes had passed since the funeral. Stewie was miserable.
It was the family's first Christmas without Brian, and it seemed like no one even wanted to say the dog's name out loud. At the mall, a man dressed as Santa asked Stewie what he wanted for Christmas. After thinking hard, Stewie said the only thing he wanted was his best friend back. He did not care about toys or the holiday or anything else. He just wanted his dog. Then Stewie spotted something across the mall. It was his own past self, the version from that small forgotten joke, the one who had traveled forward in time to grab Christmas toys early. And Stewie realized that this past version was carrying a working time machine from a moment before Brian had ever been hit. If he could get his hands on it, he could go back and save him. Vinny, the new dog, helped pull it off, sweet-talking the past Stewie into handing over the bag that held the machine. Before he left, Stewie said goodbye to Vinny, knowing that if Brian lived, the family would never have needed a new dog and would never have met Vinny at all. Saving Brian meant erasing his replacement. Stewie traveled back to the street, to the moment before the car came, and this time, he shoved Brian out of the way. The car missed. Brian lived. The whole sad chapter simply unraveled, undone as if it had never happened. In the new version of events, the present-day Stewie walked out of the house and found Brian standing in the street and asked him who he had been talking to out there. Brian, who did not fully understand what had just happened, only said that it was a pretty awesome guy. The dog was back. The new dog was gone. The show's old rule, that nothing ever really sticks, snapped back into place as though it had never been broken. To many fans, this whole saga lives on as one of the boldest and also one of the most questionable things the show ever did. On one hand, it created real feeling, real grief, and a level of attention the show had not gotten in years. On the other hand, it tricked its own most loyal fans into mourning, let them sign their names by the thousands, and then revealed the death had been fake the entire time, with the cure already written and waiting. It fits everything seen so far about this show. Family Guy has always known its audience was watching closely and caring deeply, and here it used that caring on purpose, squeezed it for a few weeks, and then handed everyone their dog back, wrapped up like a Christmas gift. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Even in the middle of all that sadness, while Brian lay dying at the animal hospital, the show could not fully resist itself. In the waiting room, Peter struck up a chat with a battered chicken who wanted nothing to do with him, a small nod to a feud that fans know very well. That feud, a brutal and endless war between Peter and a single giant chicken, has been raging quietly across the years, swallowing whole stretches of episodes at a time, and hiding inside its chaos some of the biggest slip-ups the show has ever made. Section 5. The War with the Giant Chicken. This show is built out of jokes that come back again and again, but one of them towers over all the others in size, in noise, and in how much damage it leaves behind. It is the war between Peter Griffin and a giant chicken named Ernie. Over many years and many seasons, the two of them have stopped whatever they were doing, found each other, and beaten one another half to death across rooftops, sewers, airplanes, and entire city streets. The fight has no real place in any story. It simply arrives, takes over the screen, and then ends, and the show goes back to whatever it was doing before, as if a man and a chicken had not just leveled half a town. The whole feud started over almost nothing, and that is the heart of the joke. Long ago, the giant chicken handed Peter a coupon, the kind of paper slip that gives you a deal on something at a store. The coupon had already expired. It was no good anymore. For most people, that would be a small annoyance, a shrug and a sigh. For Peter, it was a reason to go to war. He attacked the chicken on the spot, and the chicken hit back, and that single expired coupon set off a grudge that has lasted for the rest of the show. Peter has even said, more or less, that he no longer trusts a coupon from any chicken ever again. One worthless slip of paper turned into years of broken bones. That first brawl, shown back in the early days of the show, set the pattern for everything that followed. It spilled out across a busy downtown full of office buildings and people just trying to go about their day. At one point, Peter slammed the chicken's head into an office copier over and over, the machine flashing as it crushed him. Peter seemed sure he had finally won. He even started explaining the whole strange fight to a room full of shocked office workers. Then,
Then, the chicken, who looked completely dead, suddenly grabbed him from behind and locked him in a chokehold, and the two of them crashed straight off the side of the building, falling all the way to the ground, with Peter landing right on top of them. After all of that, the chicken still was not finished. One of his eyes slowly opened, telling everyone watching that he had lived through it, and that this was far from over. That last little detail, the eye opening after the fight is supposedly done, became the rule of the whole running joke. No matter what happens to the giant chicken, no matter how thoroughly he seems to be destroyed, he always survives. He gets chopped, smashed, dropped, crushed, and burned. And at the end of every battle, once Peter has limped away thinking the job is finished, the chicken twitches back to life. He is the one enemy in the entire show who can never truly be beaten. He always comes back for one more round. The fights themselves follow a shape that fans learn to recognize and look forward to. Peter will be in the middle of some completely ordinary moment, talking to Lois in the kitchen or walking down the street, when the giant chicken appears out of nowhere. The instant they spot each other, everything stops. Peter drops whatever he was doing, and the two of them tear into one another. The fight then travels. It does not stay in one room or one street. It moves through the whole world of the show, from the inside of houses to underground tunnels to moving trains to the open sky. Along the way, they wreck cars, smash buildings, and put countless innocent bystanders in danger, none of which the show pauses to feel bad about. Then, eventually, Peter wins. He drags himself back to the exact spot where the fight began, bruised and bloody, and picks up his sentence right where he left off, as though no time has passed and nothing unusual just happened. Lois rarely even reacts. The plot of the episode rolls on, completely untouched by the giant battle that just tore through it. There have been many of these fights over the years, and the show keeps finding new places to set them. In one, Peter was trying to protect his neighbor Quagmire, and the chicken ambushed him for it, sending them brawling through a train station and onto a cruise ship. During that one, the chicken got caught in the spinning blade at the front of an airplane and was chopped apart, which would end any normal creature. He survived that too. In another, longer battle, the chicken broke right into the Griffin family home to come after Peter, and the fight that followed dragged them through the house, down into the sewers, through a subway, across a construction site, into an airplane, and finally onto a spinning Ferris wheel at a fair. That particular fight ended in the strangest and most human way the feud has ever taken. By the time it was over, the two of them had completely forgotten what they were even fighting about, so the giant chicken did something unexpected. He invited Peter out to dinner to make peace over the silly little expired coupon that started it all. He even brought his wife, who was also a giant chicken, named Nicole. It was over that dinner, almost as a throwaway moment, that the chicken's own name was finally revealed. He is called Ernie. After all the years of beating each other senseless, the audience learned his name only when his wife said it at a quiet restaurant table. And then, of course, the piece fell apart in seconds. When the bill came, both Peter and Ernie insisted on paying it, and that small, polite argument, on top of Peter being rude to Nicole, was enough to start the whole war over again right there at the table. A frying pan came down on Ernie's head, hard enough to crack it open. His eye opened anyway. He was fine. The show has even reached back in time to add new chapters to The Grudge. In one episode, Peter traveled into the past to a school dance in the 1980s, in a nod to a famous time travel movie. While he was there, dancing, he accidentally punched a younger version of Ernie right in the face. A bystander had to calm the young chicken down, telling him to let it go since he would probably never see this man again. The joke is that this single accidental punch, decades in the past, becomes one more secret reason for all the rage that would build up between them later. The Grudge stretches across the years and even rewrites its own beginning. The reason these fights work so well comes from the gap between how huge they look and how little they mean. Each battle is drawn and staged like a scene from an enormous, expensive action movie. There is dramatic music, daring stunts, narrow escapes, explosions, and a body count. Everything about how it is made tells the eye that this is the most important thing in the world, and then it ends, and it turns out to mean absolutely nothing. Peter walks back into his kitchen and finishes a sentence about dinner. The show is gently making fun of big action movies, the kind that blow up entire cities over some small disagreement, by taking that idea to its silliest end. A grown man and a chicken destroy a town over an expired coupon, and then go right back to their lives. There is comfort in it too, the special comfort of a joke you can see coming.
Longtime fans know that sooner or later, in almost every season, the giant chicken will show up. They know the fight will be long. They know it will travel everywhere. They know Peter will win, and they know the chicken will open his eye at the end. The fun is not in being surprised. The fun is in watching the show find a fresh way to play the same beloved tune. Each fight is a
little different, with new settings and new gags, but the bones underneath are always the same, and that sameness is exactly why people love it. Now for the part that ties this running joke back to everything seen so far. Because the chicken fights are not only the show's wildest gag, they are also one of its very best hiding places for mistakes. These battles move so fast, with so much crashing and flipping and falling all at once, that the eye simply cannot keep track of every object in the frame. And whenever the eye cannot keep up, the drawing slips have room to hide.
Look closely at that very first downtown fight, the one that started it all, and the cracks start to show. During part of it, Peter gets knocked off the top of a large truck and grabs hold of the truck's ladder to keep from falling. In one shot, he is hanging from a low rung near the bottom. A moment later, when the truck driver glances in his side mirror, Peter is suddenly hanging from the top of the ladder instead, having jumped up several feet with no time to do it. Then, as the truck rolls away with the chicken riding on top and waving, the entire ladder that Peter had just been clinging to is gone. It has simply vanished from the back of the truck, as if it were never there. That kind of thing happens more than once in these fights. In another moment of chicken fighting chaos, objects sitting out in the road, the ordinary clutter of a street, blink out of existence between one shot and the next. There, and then not there. None of it is noticeable while the fight is playing at full speed. The brain is far too busy following the punches and the falling bodies to notice that a ladder disappeared or a street suddenly emptied. The same trick seen earlier is at work here. Speed covers the slips. The faster and busier a scene gets, the easier it is for a mistake to slide by unseen, and few scenes in this show are faster or busier than a giant chicken fight. The chaos is not only a joke, it is camouflage. Set all of this beside the story of Brian, and a quiet truth about the show comes into focus. When the show wanted to break hearts, it killed the family dog and made the whole world believe he was gone for good, even though he was not. But the giant chicken is the opposite case. He is the creature the show will never allow to die, no matter how many times it pretends to kill him. Brian, who was gentle and beloved, was taken away. Ernie, who is violent and means nothing to the plot, is granted endless life, one opening eye at a time. The show decides what stays and what goes entirely by what serves the joke, and the joke says the chicken must always rise again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That endless life has even carried Ernie outside his own war and into the show's biggest experiment of all. When the show set out to retell an entire famous space movie from start to finish, casting its own characters in every role, the giant chicken was handed a part. He played a quiet, armored bounty hunter, standing across from Peter, who took the lead role. For once, the two of them shared the screen without throwing a single punch. And that giant retelling of a movie is worth stopping on for its own sake, because as the show filled the background of that far-off galaxy with face after face, a strange number of those faces did not belong to Family Guy at all. They had wandered in, quietly, from entirely different cartoons. Section 6. The Galaxy Full of Borrowed Faces. The biggest single thing this show ever attempted was not a joke that lasts a few seconds. It was a stunt that swallowed 3 whole episodes, spread out over a few years, and rebuilt one of the most famous movie stories ever told, scene by scene, using the people of Quahog in every role. The show took the original Star Wars trilogy, all 3 films, and acted them out as cartoons, with Peter and his family and neighbors standing in for the heroes and villains of a galaxy far away. It began, as so much in this show does, with something small and ordinary. The power goes out at the Griffin house during a storm, leaving the family sitting in the dark with nothing to do. To pass the time, Peter offers to tell them a story, and the story he tells is Star Wars. From there, the screen melts away from the dark living room into deep space, and the family members become the characters in the tale Peter is spinning. That first episode was called Blue Harvest, and it retold the very first Star Wars film. It was such a hit, loved by fans and praised by critics, that the show came back and did it twice more, telling the second and third films in the same way, until the entire original trilogy had been remade in Quahog form. A project this big needed permission. Star Wars belongs to a company, and you cannot simply borrow the most famous spaceships and heroes in the world without asking. The people who own Star Wars turned out to be unusually kind about it. They gave the show the green light to use just about anything they wanted, which is rare and generous. With that door thrown wide open, the man who created the show decided not to do a few small references, but to go all the way and rebuild the whole thing. The original writer of the first film was even listed as one of the writers on the episode, a small bow of respect to where the story came from. Half the fun lives in who got cast as whom. Peter, loud and reckless, played the smooth space smuggler, the hero who flies the famous
ship. His son Chris played the young farm boy who becomes the great hero of the story. Lois played the brave princess. Brian, the family dog, became the tall, furry creature who was the smuggler's loyal partner. Stewie, the baby, was the perfect choice for the masked dark villain, the one who breathes loud and serves the evil empire.
The neighbor Quagmire became the fussy golden robot, and Peter's old friend Cleveland became the little beeping robot that rolls alongside him. The strange old man from down the street played the wise old wizard who guides the young hero. Even the mayor of the town got a part as a cruel commander of the empire. One bit of casting became a running joke across all 3 episodes, and it is a cruel one aimed at poor Meg. The daughter of the family is treated badly by everyone, and the Star Wars episodes kept that going by casting her every single time as the ugliest monster on screen. In the first film, she played the slimy creature lurking in the trash. In the second, she was a giant slug living inside an asteroid. In the third, she became the gaping pit in the desert that swallows people whole. 3 movies, 3 hideous monsters, never once a normal character. The show could not resist using even its grand space project as one more way to pick on Meg.
The heart of this whole thing, and the part that connects back to so much scene already, lives in one particular scene. There is a famous spot in the first Star Wars film, a rough space bar packed with strange aliens from across the galaxy, where the heroes go to hire their pilot. When the show recreated that bar, it filled the background with odd creatures, which is exactly what the bar is supposed to be full of. But if a viewer slows the scene down and studies the faces in the crowd, something surprising appears. Several of those background aliens are not made-up Star Wars creatures at all. They are not even from Family Guy. They are characters borrowed from completely different cartoons, sitting quietly in the corners of the bar as if they belonged there. There is a shiny metal robot from a space cartoon called Futurama leaning at the bar. There is a small gray alien from American Dad, another show, chatting in the foreground.
There is a gruff cartoon man from an older show called Home Movies. And tucked in there too is the evil monkey, a creature from Family Guy's own world who normally lives in Chris's bedroom closet. None of them say a word. None of them are pointed out. They are simply placed in the background, in plain sight, hidden only by how busy and how fast the scene is, waiting for the kind of careful viewer who freezes the picture and reads every face. The robot's appearance carries a second, deeper joke buried inside the first. In the real Star Wars film, that very bar has a famous rule. It does not allow robots inside. The heroes have to leave their own robots outside before they can enter. So, by placing a robot from another cartoon right there at the bar, the show broke the bar's own rule, sneaking a machine into the one place machines are banned. It is a joke hidden inside a cameo, hidden inside a recreation of a movie. Layer upon layer, all of it stuffed into a single quiet shot. The borrowed faces in that bar point to something bigger and truer about this show, which is that Family Guy does not stand alone. It lives inside a small neighborhood of cartoons, several of them made by the very same person. The little gray alien comes from American Dad, a show created by the same man who made Family Guy. The little beeping robot was played by Cleveland, a character who, in real life, went on to leave Family Guy and star in his very own spin-off show. These shows are siblings. They share a maker, they share a sense of humor, and now and then, they share their characters, lending them back and forth like cousins swapping clothes. By the time the show reached the 3rd and final Star Wars episode, it had stopped hiding this habit and started joking about it openly. More characters from those sister shows showed up to fill out the galaxy, and when the little gray alien from American Dad appeared once again, the show paused to wink at the whole thing. Stewie, playing the dark masked villain, reacted with surprise at seeing him, and asked, more or less, whether the show had really run so low on its own characters that it now had to borrow one from another program. The villain of the story, breaking character to complain that the cast is being padded out with guests from the neighbor's show. The show caught itself raiding its siblings' closets and decided the only thing to do was point at it and laugh. The borrowing went in both directions, which makes the neighborhood feel even more real. Family Guy gave away one of its own, sending Cleveland off to lead a new show of his own. It was even joked that this Cleveland show could be the one to handle the earlier Star Wars films someday. So characters flow out of Family Guy into new shows, and characters flow back in for a quick cameo, and the whole little world of these cartoons stays loosely stitched together, with the same maker pulling the threads. While building this enormous space project, the show could not turn off its hunting instinct, the same instinct this entire video runs on. It went looking for mistakes, and it found one in the most famous place possible.
possible, inside the original film it was copying so lovingly. In the real movie, the smuggler hero brags about how fast his ship is by saying it made a certain famous journey in a small number of parsecs. The trouble is that a parsec is a measure of distance, like a mile, not a measure of time, like a minute. Bragging that you finished a trip in 12 parsecs is a bit like bragging that you ran a race in 12 miles instead of 12 minutes. It does not quite make sense. The line has bugged careful fans of the original film for decades. So when Family Guy got to that moment, it stopped and had the young hero point the error out loud, right there in the bar. The show paused, in the middle of honoring the most beloved space movie ever made, just to catch it making a slip.
That is the same eye for hidden mistakes that finds vanishing eyebrows and changing addresses, now turned on a different target. The hidden gifts in these episodes go deeper still, for the viewer patient enough to look. At one point, the heroes step off an elevator on the wrong floor, and in the background of that quick shot, a couple is getting married. Those two are not Star Wars characters at all. They are borrowed, again, from a completely different television show, a live-action comedy, dropped into the galaxy for a single passing moment that almost no one would ever catch. The man who made the whole show even hid himself inside his own galaxy. In the second of the 3 episodes, there is a worker shown loading the frozen body of the smuggler hero into a ship, and that worker is a cartoon version of the show's own creator. The person who built this entire world quietly painted himself into the background as a nameless laborer, doing a small job in a scene he wrote.
There are little secrets, too, about how the thing was actually made, the kind of behind-the-scenes truth that turns into its own piece of trivia. For one of the voices in the project, the show did not hire the original actor fresh. Instead, it dug up old recorded lines from a comedy film that actor had made many years earlier and reused them, because paying him to come in and record new lines would have cost too much. So a small part of this grand space epic is built out of leftover scraps from a much older movie, stitched in to save money. The show wrapped its first Star Wars episode with one last wink at the world of cartoons around it. At the very end, Peter and Chris fall into an argument about another show that had also done its own version of a Star Wars spoof, almost as if Family Guy were a little defensive about not being the only one with the idea. The funny part sits underneath. The actor who provides the voice of Chris had, in real life, helped create that very other show. So the argument is one cartoon poking fun at a rival cartoon, voiced by a man who has a foot in both. The joke folds back on itself, the way so many of this show's best jokes do. All of it, the borrowed bar aliens, the swapped characters, the married strangers from another sitcom, the creator hiding as a worker, the rival show poked at by a man who made it, points to the same simple truth. Family Guy has never been an island. It sits in a busy little neighborhood of shows, lending faces and stealing them back, winking at its siblings and jabbing at its rivals, and burying nearly all of it in the background, where only the people who slow the picture down will ever find it. The galaxy Peter dreamed up during a blackout turned out to be packed with faces that wandered in from everywhere else. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Of all the shows in that crowded neighborhood, though, one stood apart from the rest. It was older, more respected, and more decorated. An animated family that came first, and that Family Guy would forever be measured against, fairly or not. For years, the two shows circled each other, trading small insults from a safe distance. The day they finally stopped circling and met face to face turned into something far stranger and far more bitter than a friendly visit between neighbors. Section 7. The family they could never outrun. There is one show that has shadowed Family Guy for its entire life, and it is another cartoon about a family. An older one, a yellow one. The Simpsons had been on the air for about 10 years before Family Guy ever showed up, and in that decade it had become the most respected animated comedy in the world, piling up awards and praise and a place in television history. Then along came a new cartoon on the very same network, also about a dim, heavy-set father, his wife, his kids, and the chaos of family life in a small American town. The comparison was instant, and it never stopped. For years, people accused Family Guy of being a copy, a cheaper, ruder, less clever version of the show that came first. Both were animated, both aired on the same channel on Sunday nights, both centered on a foolish dad who means well and makes a mess of everything. To a lot of viewers and critics, the newer show looked like it had simply borrowed the older show's whole shape and swapped in different jokes. The two programs sniped at each other from a distance over the years, trading little insults across the television dial, like neighbors who never quite get along, but never quite fight either. Then, in the year 2014, the circling stopped. The two families finally met. Family Guy opened its 13th season with a full crossover episode, an hour where the Griffins traveled into the world of The Simpsons and the two casts shared the screen for the first time. The episode was called The Simpsons Guy, and fans had wanted to see this collision for a very long time. What they got was stranger and more honest than a simple, friendly visit, because the show used the whole thing to drag its oldest, sorest argument out into the open and laugh at it. The episode knew exactly what it was, and it said so right away. It opens with the Griffin family at home watching a crossover between two other shows, and Chris launches into a little speech about how crossover episodes only ever happen for noble, creative reasons, never for money or for boosting how many people tune in. The joke, of course, is that this is plainly untrue, and the show is admitting it while doing the exact thing it is mocking.
Chris even sums up what a skeptical viewer might be thinking, saying with a straight face that a crossover always brings out the best in each show. The show was poking fun at itself before the story even began. The plot that carries the families together is small and silly in the usual way. Peter decides the comic strips in his local newspaper are not funny and that he could do far better, so he starts drawing his own. It works for a moment, people enjoy it, and then it turns crude and offensive enough that the family has to flee town. Their car gets stolen along the way, leaving them stranded, and they wander into a town called Springfield, which is where the Simpsons live. The two families meet, and at first everything is warm. The dads, Peter and Homer, hit it off and become fast friends. The kids pair up. Stewie, the baby, is dazzled by Bart's pranks and trades his mind control gadget for Bart's slingshot. Lisa, the smart Simpson daughter, takes Meg under her wing and teaches her the saxophone, and Meg actually turns out to be good at it, which is a small mercy for a character the show usually treats so badly. The friendship falls apart over beer, and this is where the episode reveals its true purpose. Peter introduces Homer to the beer from his world called Pawtucket Patriot Ale. They take it to the local bar, and the bartender peels the label off the bottle, and underneath sits the label of Duff, the famous beer from the Simpsons world. Pawtucket beer turns out to be a knockoff of Duff. A lawyer for Duff shows up and sues Peter's brewery for stealing their product, and Peter is dragged into court to defend it, with the fate of his whole town hanging on the outcome. That lawsuit is not really about beer at all. It is the show putting its oldest accusation on trial, in public, in front of everyone. For years, people had said that Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. So the show built a courtroom story where its own beer is accused of stealing from The Simpsons beer, knowing full well that every viewer would understand what the beer really stood for. The newer show took the charge that had followed it for over a decade and acted it out as a comedy, daring the audience to see the joke. The way the case ends is the boldest part. The judge in the trial turns out to be Fred Flintstone, the father from an even older cartoon family, one that came before The Simpsons by decades. He listens to the whole argument and declares that both beers, Pawtucket and Duff, are really just copies of his own beer from his own older show. In other words, The Simpsons beer is a copy too of something that came first. It is a clever defense buried in a gag. Everyone copies someone, the show seems to say, and the great respected Simpsons is itself built on the bones of cartoons that came before it. And yet, even after saying all that, the judge still rules in favor of Duff. The Simpsons wins the case. Family Guy, in its own crossover, on its own show, let the older family win the argument about who copied whom. That is a remarkable thing to do. Half a confession and half a shrug. Then comes the fight, and the fight is a love letter to everything seen a few sections ago. When Peter and Homer finally clash, the two of them tear into a long, sprawling, city-wrecking brawl that travels all over Springfield, smashing through buildings and crashing across the town. Anyone who has watched Family Guy knows this rhythm at once, because it is built exactly like the endless battles between Peter and the giant chicken. The same enormous scale, the same trail of destruction, the same refusal to end. The show made the joke impossible to miss. When the two dads finally stagger apart, a heavy man from the local comic shop wanders up, looks at the wreckage, and dismisses the whole thing as the worst chicken fight he has ever seen, naming the very Family Guy gag the fight was copying. The show reached across into another world and brought its own running joke with it. Inside that fight sits the sharpest jab of all, and it is aimed squarely at Family Guy itself. As the two men battle, Homer starts grabbing his awards, the golden trophies his show has won, and hurling them at Peter as weapons. Homer has a whole pile of them to throw, because The Simpsons had won more than 30 of television's top prizes over its long life. Peter, getting pelted, protests that this is not fair, because he does not have any of those to throw back. And that is true. As a show, Family Guy had never
won those top awards, not one, while The Simpsons had a mountain of them.
The newer show put its own empty trophy shelf right there on screen and let its rival beat it with the gap.
It is the kind of joke that only works if you are willing to laugh at your own sore spot, and Family Guy was willing. The brawl spins out into pure cartoon madness from there, the way these fights always do. The two dads crash into the town's nuclear plant, tumble into the reactor, and come out with superpowers. They smash into a spaceship belonging to two aliens from the Simpsons world, wreck it, and lose their powers when it falls back to Earth. They end up at the edge of a famous gorge from The Simpsons, a spot where that show once staged one of its own most memorable failed stunts, trading their last blows until the falling spaceship finally crushes Homer, at least for a moment. The fight uses landmarks and gags from The Simpsons world the whole way through, a guest being respectful of the house it is visiting, even while breaking all the furniture. It ends in peace.
Homer drags himself up, the two dads find each other, and Peter apologizes. They admit, at last, that they actually respect and admire one another. The two families part as friends. As a final wink, the dads agree to keep their two shows a careful half-hour apart, a nod to how the two programs really did sit near each other in the Sunday night television schedule, sharing an evening on the same channel for years. Even the goodbye was a joke about the real world outside the cartoon. The whole episode is stitched through with these little self-aware needles, the same habit seen back in the newspaper that mocked people who paused their screens. When Stewie meets Bart, he comments that Bart sounds like a girl, which is a quiet nod to the real fact that the boy Bart is voiced by a woman. Bart, at one point, mentions that the school bully has been tormenting him for 24 years, a joke that only lands if you know that is roughly how long The Simpsons had been on the air by then.
And true to the borrowed faces habit from the space episodes, characters from the show's sister programs slip into the crossover too. The little gray alien from American Dad, who turned up in the cantina among the Star Wars aliens, appears here as well, wandering between the two famous families like a guest who shows up to every party. What makes this episode matter, beyond the gags, is how openly it faced a thing most shows would rather hide. Family Guy had spent its whole life being told it was a lesser copy of a greater show. Instead of pretending the comparison did not exist, it invited the greater show over, handed it a pile of awards to throw, lost the plagiarism case on purpose, and let the older family walk away the winner of the argument. The newer show could have used the crossover to puff itself up, to prove it belonged among the greats. It did something braver and funnier.
It made a whole episode out of admitting the joke at its own expense, then shook hands and called the rival a friend.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fight with The Simpsons ended in respect, with two dads admiring each other across a wrecked town. But the show did not always pick fights it could end so warmly. Family Guy made a habit of mocking real, living people and real, touchy subjects, and sometimes it pushed so hard that the targets pushed back, or worse. There was even one finished episode that the show's own network looked at, decided was too much, and refused to let anyone see at all. Section 8. The times it went too far. The fight with The Simpsons ended in a handshake. Two cartoon dads, bruised and laughing and calling each other friends. The show did not always wrap things up so warmly. Family Guy built its whole name on the promise that nothing was off the table.
It would joke about anyone, living or dead, famous or holy, kind or cruel.
Other shows had topics they tiptoed around. This show ran straight at them on purpose, daring the audience to gasp. Most of the time it got away with it, and the gasps turned into laughs. A few times it did not get away with it at all. A few times the joke bit back, and once the show pushed so far that its own network slammed a door it had never slammed before. To understand how rare that is, it helps to remember how much this show normally gets to do. For years it had been the rudest program on its channel, the one that watchdog groups circled and complained about and tried to get punished, episode after episode. The show wore those complaints like a badge. It mocked the very people who wanted it gone. It survived being canceled twice and still came back ruder than before.
So when something proved too much, even for a show this fearless, on a network this used to the noise, it meant a line had been crossed that almost nothing ever crosses. One group in particular made a kind of career out of opposing the show. Over the years, it named Family Guy the worst program on all of television dozens of separate times, and it filed complaint after complaint with the government office that watches over what is allowed on the air, hoping to see the show fined or yanked off entirely. None of it worked. The show kept running, kept pushing, and kept turning the complaints themselves into fuel for new jokes. So the people who ran the network had heard every kind of objection many times over, and had grown a thick skin to all of it. That history history is exactly what makes the handful of times the network actually backed down so striking. A single example shows how the show liked to handle the darkest material of all.
In one episode, a man has to be given the worst possible news about his health, that he is dying of a serious disease with no cure. Rather than break it to him gently, the show sends Peter in with a cheerful four-man singing group, the kind that wears matching striped outfits and harmonizes with big smiles, and they dance around the dying man's bed while turning the grim news into a bouncy, upbeat little song. Wrapping the saddest thing imaginable inside the silliest possible package was exactly the kind of move the show loved, and exactly the kind that flooded the network with furious letters. That instinct to find the jolliest way to deliver the bleakest news is the same instinct that would one day carry the show straight into the one episode it could not get on the air. That line was an episode called Partial Terms of Endearment, and it was meant to be the final episode of the show's 8th season. The story, for once, was carefully built.
An old college friend of Lois comes to her with a request.
The friend and her husband cannot have a baby on their own, and they ask Lois to carry one for them, to be what is called a surrogate, a woman who gives birth to a child meant for another family. After arguing about it with Peter, Lois agrees. She goes through the medical steps and becomes pregnant with the couple's child. Then, the story takes a dark turn, of the kind this show usually saves for a quick throwaway joke. The couple who were going to raise the baby are both killed in a car accident. Lois is left pregnant with a child that was never supposed to be hers, and with a terrible choice in front of her. She can carry the baby to the end and give it up to be adopted by someone else, or she can end the pregnancy. The decision tears at her, and it splits the household.
Peter first leans toward ending it, then flips completely after a group of anti-abortion campaigners get hold of him and convince him the choice would be murder. The two of them go back and forth, and in the end, after talking it through at home, Lois decides to end the pregnancy. That was the wall the show ran into. Abortion is one of the most divisive subjects in the entire country, the kind of topic that splits families and friendships and whole regions down the middle. And this show did not just bring it up in passing. It let its main character struggle with it honestly and then go through with it, right there on screen, in a cartoon famous for treating everything as a joke. The mix of the silly and the deadly serious was a step too far for the people in charge. Part of what made it feel so risky was that the show refused to take a clean side. It did not turn into a neat lecture for one team or the other.
Peter swings from one position to the opposite after a pushy group of campaigners works on him, looking foolish at every step, the way Peter always does. Lois is the one who actually wrestles with the weight of the choice, and the decision she lands on is her own. The show let both sides of the argument talk, and then let its character decide for herself, without wrapping the whole thing in a tidy little lesson at the end. A safe, gift-wrapped moral might have given the network something to hide behind. This episode handed them no such cover, and the lack of cover made it far more frightening to put on the air. The network looked at the finished episode and refused to put it on. This was not a script that got rejected before anyone drew it. The episode was complete. It was written, voiced, fully animated, scored with music, and ready to broadcast like any other. And then it was locked in a drawer.
The decision was so firm that the show announced it ahead of time, at a giant gathering of fans more than a year before the rest of that season even reached television. The message went out long before anyone could ever watch. This one would not be shown. The head of the network explained the choice in plain terms. He said abortion was an extremely fragile subject at an extremely fragile time, that of all the hot topics out there, this was the hottest, that the episode felt like it could cause real trouble, and that putting it on simply was not worth the risk. There was no claim that the episode was badly made, or that it was not funny. The reasoning was about danger and timing and money, about a network deciding the headache would be bigger than the reward. To this day, the network has never aired it. Out of hundreds and hundreds of episodes, across more than 20 years, this is the single one that an American viewer cannot just turn on. It never slipped into late-night reruns. It never ran on the cartoon block that shows the rest of the series at all hours. It is missing from the streaming home where every other episode lives, uncut and complete. A whole finished chapter of the show, made by the same hands, voiced by the same cast, and then quietly walled off from the very country that produced it. The episode was not destroyed, though, which makes its story stranger still. Across the ocean, in Britain, a network had no such fears, and aired it in its normal late evening slot. It reached around 1 million homes there, and drew good reviews from fans and critics alike. The show also put the episode out on a disc that anyone could buy and keep, so the only ways for an American fan to see this piece of their own show were to order it on a disc, find
find it for sale online, or somehow catch it from another country entirely. A part of the show became something a person had to hunt down and pay for, hidden in plain sight from the place where it was born.
True to its nature, the show could not even leave its own buried episode alone for long. In a later look-back special, made to mark the series reaching a huge round number of episodes, the show found a way to nod toward the one chapter that nobody had been allowed to see. It could not resist joking about its own missing piece, treating the ban itself as just another scrap of material to mine for a laugh. The episode the network had hidden became, in the show's own hands, one more inside joke for the fans who knew it was out there. There is a quiet little detail that turns the buried episode into a kind of time capsule. It happened to be the last episode the show made in the older, boxy picture shape, the squarish frame that fit the televisions of an earlier time, just before the whole series switched over to the wider, modern shape. It was also one of the last to use an older version of the opening.
So the one episode locked away from American screens is also a snapshot of the show as it used to look, frozen at the very moment it was about to change its whole appearance. The hidden episode is older in look and feel than the way most people now picture the show. This was not the very first time the network had gotten nervous about something the show made. Years earlier, in the show's third season, there was an episode where Peter, hoping for help with his money, wishes for a Jewish person to come into his life, leaning on an old and ugly stereotype. The joke played on a tired, hurtful idea about Jewish people and money, the sort of lazy stereotype that has caused real harm for a very long time. The people in charge worried it would be read as cruel, and they held it back. For roughly 3 years, it sat on a shelf, unseen, a finished episode that no one outside the show had watched, while the bosses decided whether the joke was sharp satire or just an old slur dressed up in a cartoon. The difference is that this earlier one eventually got out. It finally aired, first on the late-night cartoon block and later on the main network itself. The show had pushed, the network had flinched, and then, after enough time had passed, the door reopened and the episode walked through it. The abortion episode never got that second chance. One delay ended in release, the other ended in a permanent lock. Picking fights with the network was one kind of risk. Picking fights with real, living people was another, and the show did that constantly, sometimes with results it could not control. The clearest example landed on a Valentine's Day episode in the show's 8th season, the very same season as the buried one.
In it, Chris goes on a date with a sweet, friendly girl named Ellen, who has Down syndrome. The date is gentle by this show's standards. Ellen is confident and funny and is treated as a full person rather than a punchline, and she and Chris share a real connection. Then, in the middle of it, Ellen mentions what her parents do for a living. She says her father is an accountant and her mother is the former governor of Alaska. That single line was a dart aimed at a very specific, very real person. At the time, there was a famous politician who had been the governor of Alaska and had recently run for one of the highest offices in the whole country. She had a young son who had been born with Down syndrome, and she had spoken about him often and publicly. The joke pointed straight at her, tying her real family and her real child to the cartoon. There was no mistaking the target, and against the otherwise gentle portrait of Ellen, that one sharp line stood out all the more.
The politician was furious. She spoke out, calling the joke another kick to the gut, treating it as a swipe at her and her son. Her own daughter joined in, calling the show's writers heartless. To them, the show had taken a real child with a real disability and used him to score a cheap laugh, which is exactly the kind of charge this show drew again and again over the years. Then came the twist that makes this case different from all the others. The person who provided the voice for Ellen, the cartoon girl with Down syndrome, was a real actress who herself has Down syndrome. She had worked in television and film for many years, and when the politician spoke out in anger, this actress did not stand beside her. She publicly answered back, and she sided with the show. She said the politician simply did not have a sense of humor. She said she had found the joke funny, that she understood it as plain sarcasm, and that in her family, they believe laughing is good. She said her parents had raised her to live a normal life and to be able to take a joke like anyone else. She even turned the criticism around, accusing the politician of parading her own son in public to win sympathy and votes. Her answer went further than a simple defense of one joke. She pointed to the long string of roles she had played over the years, reminding everyone that she was a working actress who happened to have Down syndrome, not a symbol for strangers to argue over. The man who created the show stepped in as well, defending the episode in public and talking it through on a late-night program, arguing that treating a character with a disability like any other character, jokes and all, was a form of respect rather than an insult. Between the actress and the creator, the show built a defense that was hard to wave away, because part of it came straight from the very kind of person
person the outrage was meant to protect. So the strange shape of the whole thing was this. A powerful, famous person spoke up in defense of people with Down syndrome and was offended on their behalf. And the actual person with Down syndrome, the one whose voice was in the episode, brushed the offense aside and laughed along with the show. The people who were supposed to be the victims of the joke were, in this case, the ones least bothered by it, while the loudest hurt came from someone speaking for them rather than from among them. That tangle sits at the very center of what makes this show so hard to judge cleanly. Its defenders have always said it mocks everyone equally, that no group is spared, and so no group is truly singled out. Its critics have always answered that mocking everyone is not the same as mocking fairly, and that some of the show's jokes land hardest on the people who can least fight back. The Down syndrome episode throws both arguments into confusion at once.
The show was careless and cruel by any plain reading,
And yet the very person it seemed to be using stepped forward to say she was in on the joke and glad to be there. The show lives in that uncomfortable gray space on purpose, and it refuses to step out of it. The show seemed to enjoy that confusion and even fed on it. It had spent years insisting through its own characters and its own jokes that everything was fair game, and that flinching at any one target while laughing at all the rest was its own kind of dishonesty. By that logic, sparing a child with a disability, or a grieving parent, or a tender subject like the loss of a pregnancy would have been a quiet form of cowardice. The trouble is that the very same logic can be used to excuse almost anything, and the show surely knew it. It hid behind the idea of treating everyone the same, while choosing, again and again, exactly which sore spots to press and exactly how hard to press them.
the fairness was real and the cruelty was real, and the show never once tried to untangle the two. Set these stories beside everything seen so far, and a single engine comes into view, the same one humming underneath the whole show. This is a program built to be fearless, to treat no subject as sacred and no person as untouchable. That fearlessness is what lets it hide a street named after its creator, drop a tiny joke into the corner of a fake newspaper, and kill off its own beloved dog as a stunt. It is also what drives it straight into the few walls that even it cannot knock down. The same lack of breaks that makes the show feel so loose and so alive is what produced an episode too hot for its own network, and a joke that turned a grieving parent into a public enemy. Most of the time, the show's recklessness was a choice it made with open eyes.
The writers decided to go after a touchy subject, or a famous name, knowing full well what they were doing, betting that the laugh would be worth the heat that followed. They chose the abortion story. They chose to name a real politician and tie her to her real child. They walked into those fires on purpose, the way a person chooses to poke a sleeping bear. When it blew up because the show had reached out and struck the match itself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there was another kind of trouble waiting for this show, and it was far stranger and far harder to defend against, because it was nobody's choice at all. Sometimes, a joke made long ago, tossed off in a few seconds and then forgotten, would sit quietly inside an old episode for years, and then, with no warning, the real world would catch up to it.
A real and horrifying event would happen in the news, and one of those old throwaway gags would suddenly line up with it so closely that the clip would race across the internet on its own, ripped out of its place and held up to the world as something monstrous, forcing the show to pull an entire finished episode out of the air and its creator to speak out in disgust at what people were sharing. Section 9. When the joke met the real world. This show throws out jokes faster than almost anything else on television. A single episode can fire off dozens of them, one right after another, and a great many are about dark things, about death, disaster, violence, and pain, treated as quick throwaway gags and then dropped in a heartbeat. Most of them vanish from memory the moment the next joke arrives, but the show has been on the air for so long, piling up so many of these jokes year after year, that the odds slowly turn against it.
Make enough jokes about enough terrible things over enough decades, and sooner or later, one of those forgotten little gags will line up with something real and awful in the news. And when that day came, the show had no way to defend itself, because it had not picked the collision. The world picked it instead. The episode at the center of the worst of these moments was called Turban Cowboy, and it came from the show's 11th season. The story has Peter make friends with a man who turns out to belong to a group planning an attack, and Peter gets pulled into the plot without ever really understanding what he is part of. By the end of the episode, Peter, holding a cell phone, dials a number that sets off hidden explosives and blows up a bridge. It is the kind of dark, careless ending the show reaches for often, played for shock more than for any real weight. Earlier in that very same same episode, separate and completely unrelated, there sits a quick little side joke. A famous real-life sports announcer, lending his own voice to the cartoon, asks Peter how he managed to win the Boston Marathon, a huge and famous foot race run every year in a real American city. The show then flashes back to show how Peter won. He did not run it. He drove his car straight through the race, plowing into the runners, leaving bodies scattered across the road behind him as he leans out the window. It is a grim and ugly gag even standing on its own, the sort of shock joke the show tosses out and then forgets. Two different scenes then, two different outfits on Peter, two different ideas, a car joke in one place and a bomb joke in another, with nothing at all tying them together. About a month after that episode first aired, a real and terrible thing happened in the actual world. At the finish line of the real Boston Marathon, in a crowd of people cheering on the runners, 2 bombs went off. 3 people were killed, and hundreds more were hurt, many of them very badly.
A place built for celebration, the end of a long and joyful race, turned in an instant into a scene of fear and harm. It was a real crime, with real victims and real grief, the kind of event that swallows the news for weeks and shakes a whole country. In the raw, frightened days right after the attack, someone took that old Family Guy episode and cut it into a lie. They took the 2 unrelated scenes and spliced them together into one. They placed the sports announcer's question about winning the marathon right up against the later scene of Peter dialing the phone that triggers the explosions. Joined that way, edited into a single smooth clip, it appeared to show Peter winning the Boston Marathon by setting off bombs that killed the runners, as though the cartoon had somehow acted out the real attack in advance. The whole thing was false, built out of pieces that had nothing to do with each other, but it was cut cleverly enough to fool anyone giving it only a quick look.
A quick look was all most people gave it. The fake clip tore across the internet. It jumped from person to person, share after share, in those first shaken days when everyone was scared and grasping for anything tied to what had just happened. Huge numbers of the people who watched it had no idea they were looking at a stitched-together hoax. To them, it seemed like proof of something eerie and sick, a cartoon that had quietly shown the attack before it ever took place. Fear made people want to believe it, and the speed of the internet did the rest, carrying the lie to millions before the truth could pull its boots on. Anyone who slowed down and studied the clip could have spotted the seam right away. In the 2 scenes that have been glued together, Peter is wearing completely different clothes, and the show calls no attention to the change because, in the real episode, those moments happen far apart for entirely different reasons.
The lie fell apart the instant a careful eye looked at it. The trouble is that almost nobody was looking carefully. The very same speed that hides the show's secret jokes and its tiny mistakes, the speed this whole story keeps circling back to, is the speed at which the lie traveled. People shared first and checked later, if they ever checked at all, and a frightening fake outran a boring truth with ease. The network moved quickly once it understood what was spreading. It pulled the entire Turban Cowboy episode from its own website, from the streaming services that carried it, and from everywhere else it could reach, with no plan to ever air it again. It worked with the largest video site to scrub away copies of the fake clip wherever they appeared. An episode that had aired a month earlier without much fuss became suddenly untouchable, wiped from view, all because of a real-world horror it had played no part in causing. The man who created the show stepped forward and spoke for himself, which he almost never does, in a serious voice. He called the edited clip abhorrent. He said plainly that the bombing had been a crime and a tragedy, and that his thoughts were with the victims and their families. Other members of the show's team passed his words along and stood behind them. The program that mocks everything, that hardly ever apologizes, that turns its own pile of hate mail into fresh jokes, went quiet and grave for a moment. This was not a joke anyone on the show had actually made. It was a joke that a stranger had taken and twisted into a weapon, and even a show with no breaks knew the difference. The honest truth here is tangled, and it deserves to be handled with care. The real episode was already in poor taste. The gag of Peter driving his car through a crowd of marathon runners was grim and ugly all on its own, made long before any real attack, and plenty of viewers found it offensive the very day it first aired. So the show was not innocent of bad judgment. But the episode did not predict the bombing. It did not show the bombing. There were no bombs at the marathon anywhere in the cartoon. The marathon scene was about a car, and the bomb scene was about a bridge, and only a dishonest edit could ever marry the two into one. The show was guilty of a tasteless joke. It was not guilty of the monstrous thing the hoax accused it of. And that gap between the two matters. Even after the creator spoke out and the network scrubbed the clip away, the damage proved hard to fully undo. A correction almost never travels as far as the lie it is chasing. The frightening fake had already reached millions of people in those first raw days, while the calm explanation that followed
followed reached only a fraction of them. So for a long time afterward, there are people who saw the hoax, believed it, and never came across the truth that arrived later. In their memory, the cartoon really did the thing it never did. That is the cruelest part of how these clips spread. The first, false version sticks in the mind, and the careful, true version shows up too late and too quietly to ever catch up to it. The marathon hoax was the ugliest version of a thing that kept happening to this show in smaller ways. Over and over, an old Family Guy joke would resurface long after it first aired and seem, with the wisdom of hindsight, to have known something the rest of the world did not. Fans gathered these moments up and traded them, and slowly, the show grew a strange reputation. People began to talk about it almost like a cartoon fortune teller, a program that could somehow peer around the corner of time and slip a coming event into a throwaway joke years before it happened. The creator himself has a name for this reputation, the idea that the show is a kind of magic board that spells out the future, and he thinks the whole notion is overblown. The clearest example of this came from a single 5-second joke buried back in the show's 4th season, around the year 2005. In that scene, the baby Stewie comes running through a crowded store with no clothes on, screaming for help and shouting that he has just escaped from the basement of the actor Kevin Spacey. At the time, it played as one more random, shocking little gag, gone in a blink, the kind the show makes by the 100. Most people laughed, if they caught it at all, and moved on without a second thought. The joke sat quietly inside that old episode for more than 10 years, forgotten by nearly everyone. Then, many years later, the world changed around that joke. A man came forward with a serious accusation against Kevin Spacey, saying the actor had made a sexual advance toward him back in the 1980s, when the accuser was only 14 years old. More accusations followed from other people. The actor, who had become hugely famous and admired, lost his biggest roles and saw his career collapse. And, as all of this filled the news, sharp-eyed fans remembered that little joke from a decade earlier and dug it back up. The old clip spread across the internet, and people stared at it in disbelief, asking the same uneasy question. How did the show know? Did the people who made this cartoon understand, years ahead of everyone else, what this man was hiding? The answer, once the people behind the show explained it, turned out to be far less magical and far more human.
The creator has said openly that he had not even been the one to come up with that joke, and that he could not remember who had. He said that when the joke was first pitched in the writer's room, it was built on a rumor that he personally had never heard, but that several of the other writers had. The rumor had to be explained to him before he understood the joke at all. One of the producers traced the idea back to a strange news story from around that time, when the actor had reported being attacked in a park in London late at night while walking his dog, an account that had raised eyebrows and started whispers in certain circles. The show was not seeing the future. It was repeating gossip that was already floating around behind closed doors, gossip the wider public simply had not heard yet. What looked like a prediction was really just a rumor said out loud, years before that rumor was finally proven true in the open. The actor joke was not even the only time the show's creator looked, in hindsight, like he had known something. A few years before that actor's downfall, while hosting a giant Hollywood awards show, this same man had made a pointed joke about another powerful figure in the movie business, a producer who would later be exposed as a serial abuser of women. While reading out a list of nominees, he quipped that the women on the list no longer had to pretend to be attracted to that producer. When the producer's crimes finally came to light years afterward, that old joke resurfaced too, and the creator admitted it had come from a place of real anger, built on an ugly account he had already heard. Once again, what looked like foresight was really just knowledge that had been quietly passing through certain rooms long before it ever reached the public. The creator has pushed back firmly on the whole fortune teller idea. He has called the notion that the show is some all-knowing predictor sensationalized, a story that other people decided to tell about the show, rather than the truth of how it works. The show, he has said, simply makes jokes about the world as it is, the same kinds of topical jokes that other big comedy shows make, working with whatever is in the air at the time, whether that be a swirling rumor or a plain fact. With enough jokes aimed at enough subjects over enough years, he has pointed out, a handful are bound to land near something that later comes true, purely by the cold math of it. And he has aimed a finger at the way news travels now, at how, when something shocking surfaces, the rush to be the first to share a story beats the patience it takes to be right, so a juicy clip can race around the world before anyone slows down to ask whether it really means what it seems to mean. Put the two stories side by side, the marathon hoax and the actor joke, and they rhyme in a telling way. In one, a dishonest edit forced a connection that was never there, making the show look like it had staged a real attack. In the other, an old rumor turned out to be true
true, making the show look like it had glimpsed a secret. Both left the public with the same spooky feeling that this cartoon somehow knew things it should not know. And both, once you look closely, have ordinary explanations underneath the chill. A liar with a video editor in one case, a piece of old gossip and a mountain of jokes in the other. The magic was never really magic. It was volume and rumor and the breathless speed of the internet, all working together to dress up the everyday as something supernatural. There is a deep strangeness in any of this landing on this particular show. Family Guy is the program that constantly reminds you it is only a show, that has its characters wink at the camera and complain about their own plots and joke about their own network. It is never once asked to be taken seriously. And yet, for a few feverish days at a time, the world treated this self-mocking cartoon as if it were a serious source of truth, a witness to crimes, a reader of the future. The least earnest show on television kept getting handed a role it never wanted, the role of a solemn oracle, simply because a stray frame happened to line up with the news. The legend fed on itself, the way these things do. As more of these moments piled up, whole groups of fans began hunting for them on purpose, combing back through old episodes in search of any joke that could be matched to some later real event, then gathering their finds into long lists and videos. Every old episode became a hunting ground. With a show that had made so many jokes about so many things, the hunters were never going to come up empty, and so the reputation kept growing, fed less by any real power in the show than by the sheer determination of people who wanted to find it. That is what sets these collisions apart from the troubles that came before them. The buried abortion episode and the jab at the real politician were fights the show went looking for, fires it lit on purpose, knowing the heat would come, and choosing to walk into it anyway. These later moments were nothing the show chose at all. The danger came entirely from the outside. The world reached back into the show's enormous pile of old jokes, pulled one out, and either bent it into a shape it was never built to hold, or held it up as proof of a knowledge the show never claimed to have. There was no decision to defend, no line the writers had meant to cross. There was only an old joke lying around, waiting to be found, and reused by whoever came looking. The show learned, in moments like these, that having no limits cuts both ways. The freedom to joke about anything is also the freedom to be blamed for anything, because a library of jokes about every dark subject under the sun is a library that any frightened, angry, or dishonest person can go digging through. The show could control what it made. It could never control what the world chose to do with what it had made. Once those jokes were out there for good, sitting in old episodes, free to be cut and pasted and twisted and reread by anyone with a reason to. That loss of control is the quiet price of a show that promised, from its very first day, that nothing would ever be off the table. Part of why this kept happening lies in the very way the show is built. Family Guy is famous for a style where the story stops dead, so the show can cut away to a short, standalone joke that has nothing to do with anything around it. A flash of Peter recalling some random moment, a quick gag about a celebrity, a tiny scene that lasts a few seconds and then is gone for good. Because so many of the show's jokes are these little self-contained islands, cut off from the plot on purpose, they are unusually easy to lift out whole and carry somewhere else. The show, by its very design, spent decades producing thousands of perfect little clips just begging to be taken out of context, long before anyone ever dreamed of doing harm with them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. For all the dark places these collisions led, they were the rare exception, buried deep beneath something far gentler and far more common. For every old joke that the world twisted into a horror or held up as a haunting, the show had quietly planted 100 small and harmless treasures, hidden in the background for no reason other than to reward the people who kept watching closely. Behind all the shock and the noise and the trouble, there is one last set of hidden things to find, the secret recurring faces and the buried running jokes that the show tucked away just for its most faithful fans, the gentle little rewards waiting in the corners for anyone patient enough to keep looking. Section 10, the faces that keep coming back. After all the dark collisions and the buried trouble, the gentlest pleasure this show has to offer is the comfort of the familiar. Not a secret tucked into a single frame, but jokes and faces that come back again and again across the years. A slow reward for the people who stay. These are the things a longtime fan waits for. The warm and harmless little patterns that turn a chaotic cartoon into something closer to a home you can visit anytime you like. Start with the people who live in the corners of the town. Quahog is stuffed with small recurring characters who pop up doing odd jobs all over the place. There is a soft-spoken man with a gentle, drawn-out way of talking who shows up in a different job almost everywhere the family goes, working a counter here here, a desk there, a booth somewhere else. Whenever something disappointing happens near him, he lets out a long, sad, mournful little moan, a quiet sound of defeat, and then carries on. He never has a big part. He is just always there, somewhere in the background, and spotting which job he has landed in this week became its own quiet game for fans. Then there is the weatherman on the local news. The anchor at the news desk will turn things over to him with a calm, ordinary question about the forecast. And rather than give a normal report, the weatherman bellows the entire forecast in 2 or 3 shouted words at the top of his lungs, a single burst of noise, and then falls silent. The anchor calmly thanks him and moves on as if nothing strange just happened.
The joke works because it is the exact opposite of the long, padded weather segments on real news. All that build-up and then one loud shout over in a second. There is the grease-covered man who slides through scenes with no warning at all. He is naked and slick from head to toe, and he comes barreling through a crowd at full speed, while everyone around him grabs and lunges and tries to catch him. Nobody ever can. He slips right out of every hand because he is far too slippery to hold and cannot hear anyone shouting at him to stop. He streaks across the screen, leaves a trail of confusion behind him, and is gone as fast as he arrived. A little burst of pure chaos the show drops in whenever it feels like it. There is the monkey that lives in Chris's bedroom closet. For a long stretch of the show, the closet door would creep open and an angry monkey would lean out, point one menacing finger straight at Chris, and then slink back into the dark. He never spoke.
He was simply a private terror that only Chris seemed to notice, lurking among the clothes. Then the show did the thing it so loves to do and gave him a backstory. It turned out he was not really evil at all. He was a lonely, heartbroken monkey carrying his own quiet sadness, and once that came out, he and Chris slowly made their peace. Even the monster in the closet, it turned out, was just someone who needed to be understood. There is the old fisherman down by the docks, whose arms and legs are all made of wood, like the timbers of a ship. He turns up here and there, and whenever someone asks how he lost a real arm or leg, he launches into a wild, dramatic tale of some sea creature or terrible accident, and the stories never quite match from one telling to the next. He is a tiny figure who barely matters to any plot, a salty old sailor carved half out of lumber, and the show keeps him around purely because he is a delight to spot in the corner of a scene.
There is the wealthy man with the enormous lower jaw, who speaks at fancy gatherings in a deep, garbled mush that no living person could possibly understand, while the well-dressed crowd around him nods along politely, as though his nonsense made perfect sense. He appears for only a few seconds at a time, mumbles something completely unintelligible, and the entire joke is that everyone in the room pretends to follow every word. There are dozens more like them, and the show knows exactly how crowded its little world has become. In one episode, Peter ends up on a famous television game show, and the host offers to let him say hello to someone watching at home. Peter takes the chance and rattles off an enormous, breathless list of names, basically every recurring face in the whole town, one right after another, without stopping for air. The mayor, the doctor, the maid, the wooden-legged fisherman, the shouting weatherman, the slippery grease man, the giant chicken, and on and on and on.
In a single, run-on breath, the show lays out just how many familiar faces it has quietly stacked up over the years. A whole packed neighborhood of returning friends and oddballs hiding behind the main family. There is the way the whole family treats poor Meg, the daughter, which grew into a running joke all its own. Whenever Meg dares to speak up, whether her point is silly or perfectly sensible, someone, very often her own father, will simply cut her off and tell her to be quiet. It happens so often that it stopped being a single insult and turned into a reflex the whole show shares, a punchline that everyone is in on except Meg herself. The crossover with the older yellow cartoon family even paused to use it, with Peter snapping the very same dismissal at her over there. Meg is the show's permanent target, and her steady, patient suffering is one more thing a faithful fan learns to expect. Many of these jokes ride on the single trick the show is best known for.
At almost any moment, a character can say one ordinary line, and the show will instantly leap away from the story into a short, unrelated flashback to act it out. A character compares the current mess to some other time, and the screen jumps at once to that other time. A quick burst of nonsense that has nothing to do with anything around it, before snapping right back as though it never happened. This little leap, away and then home again, is the show's heartbeat. It is how the show crams in so many jokes so fast, and it is the reason so many of its gags can stand completely on their own, peeled away from any story. The recurring bits are simply the leaps the show liked enough to take more than once. Beyond the faces are the jokes that keep returning, and the most famous of those begins with Peter and his knee. After winning a piano playing contest in an early episode, Peter
slips and bangs his knee, and rather than cut away to the next thing, the show simply stays right there on him.
He clutches the knee and hisses and groans and sucks air through his teeth in pain,
On and on, for around 25 full seconds, which is an eternity for a single joke. The story just stops and waits while Peter quietly suffers. What makes that gag work is the discomfort of its own length. A normal yelp of pain lasts a single beat. This one keeps going and going, sailing past funny into awkward, and then, strangely, looping back around into funny again precisely because it refuses to end. The creator has said he enjoys letting a joke run just a little longer than it really should, and the hurt knee is that idea pushed as far as it can go. The show liked the bit so much that it brought it back in later episodes, and even slipped a version of it into its big space movie retelling, when one of the characters tumbles into a swamp and grabs his knee in the same long, wincing agony.
There is the giant walking pitcher of red drink, the cheerful mascot borrowed from old commercials, who comes smashing straight through a solid wall, yelling his happy catchphrase at the worst possible moment. A character in a scene will say something like, "If only there were some way out of this room," and a heartbeat later, the wall explodes inward and the grinning pitcher barges in. The part that makes it even funnier is the silence that follows, as the pitcher slowly realizes he has crashed in for no good reason and has to sheepishly turn around and climb back out through the very hole he just smashed, leaving everyone staring. There is the song "Peter Cannot Stop Playing." In one episode, he hears an old, silly novelty tune, a goofy little number whose entire message is just that the bird is the word, and he becomes so hopelessly obsessed with it that he plays it over and over until everyone around him is ready to scream. The joke is partly about how a catchy song can burrow into your head and drive you mad, and the show leans into its own power to annoy, repeating the tune long past the point of reason, on purpose. The show is honest, too, about the moments when its own jokes wear out. It even built a special way to punish itself for a gag that had gone on too long. When a bit had truly overstayed its welcome, the show would have Peter get suddenly smacked right in the crotch with a heavy bag of coins, a sharp, painful jolt out of nowhere, almost as though the show were apologizing to the audience for testing their patience. A program that could see itself becoming tiresome found a way to turn even that into one more joke. There are tiny spoken bits, too, jokes built on nothing more than a single word. In one beloved stretch, the baby simply cannot bring himself to say the name of a brand of fluffy dessert topping the normal way. He keeps landing hard on the wrong sound in the middle of it, over and over, drawing the word out strangely, while the dog beside him grows more and more annoyed at him for mangling it on purpose. Nothing happens. Nobody gets hurt. It is just two characters bickering over how to pronounce a word, stretched far past the point of sense. And somehow, that stretching is the whole pleasure of it. There is the next-door neighbor with the eager, sing-song little chuckle he lets out whenever anything even slightly suggestive crosses his path. That two-note giggle became so tied to him that fans can call it up in their heads on command, and the show plays with it endlessly, having him stretch it out, repeat it back to back, or fire it off at the worst moment. It works as a kind of shorthand for the whole man, a tiny burst of sound that tells you everything about him before he has finished a single sentence. A brand new viewer just hears a strange giggle.
The faithful one hears a character announcing himself and grins before the joke has even arrived. Of all these returning bits, the strangest and the most talked about is the one built around a real man named Conway Twitty. It is the kind of gag that only this show would dream up, and it sits at the very heart of what made the show feel like its own peculiar world. Twitty was a real and hugely successful country music singer, a gentle-voiced star who, for a long stretch of years, held more #1 country songs to his name than almost any performer alive. He had a real career, real fame, and a devoted following of fans who loved his warm, smooth singing. He had also died many years before this running joke ever began. By the time the show started reaching for him, he had been gone for well over a decade. The joke worked in a way that should not have worked at all. In the middle of a scene, often right after a moment too awkward or too crude to sit in comfortably, a character would suddenly turn and announce that here was Conway Twitty, and the show would cut away to a full, real clip of the long-gone singer performing one of his old songs. Not a quick flash of him, the whole song, sometimes running close to 3 full minutes, while the actual story simply froze and waited for the music to finish before picking back up. What made the gag special, and what made plenty of fans groan, was how deliberately, almost daringly dull it was. It ate up enormous chunks of an episode doing nothing but playing old footage of a man singing. The show plainly knew that some viewers would find this hilarious, and others
others would find it maddening, and it kept doing it anyway, almost teasing the audience with how long and how flat it could let the moment run.
There was a quiet sweetness folded into it as well, a loud and crude comedy reaching back again and again to a beloved singer who had passed away, keeping his old performances alive in front of young viewers who had never once heard of him. The show even joked about the joke. In one episode, Peter comes face to face with God, and God passes along a polite little message that Conway Twitty would very much appreciate it if they would stop dragging him into these gags. The show was poking fun at its own habit out loud, admitting that it had leaned on this dead singer one too many times. True to its nature, it could not resist turning even its most overused bit into one more wink, aimed straight at the loyal fans who had seen it enough times to be tired of it. Some of these rewards stretch across whole episodes rather than single jokes.
Every so often, the show sets the rest of the family aside and sends the baby and the dog off on a grand adventure together, to a faraway country, a distant time, or another world entirely. These special trips became a tradition with a shared name, each one titled as A Road to Somewhere New, the idea borrowed from a string of old travel comedies made long, long ago. The clever baby and the talking dog make an odd, mismatched pair, and these journeys gave the show room to slow down, to be sweeter and stranger than usual, and to let the deep friendship at the center of so much of the show breathe a little. For many fans, these traveling episodes are the very finest the show has ever made, and the first sign that a new one was on the way became its own quiet thrill. All of these returning faces and jokes do something gentle and powerful to a person who watches the show for long enough. The pleasure they give is the pleasure of the familiar. The very first time the shouting weatherman bellows his forecast, it lands as a surprise. The 10th time, it feels like a small homecoming. You know it is coming. You wait for it. The show delivers it right on cue, and that knowing, that quiet certainty, becomes its own kind of comfort. The returning bits slowly turn the act of watching into something closer to walking down a street where you recognize every single face. This is the part of the show that sits at the opposite end from all the trouble. The collisions and the controversies came from the show reaching outward and trying to shock the whole world. The running gags do the reverse. They reach inward, patiently building a cozy, crowded, deeply familiar place that rewards a person simply for having been there before. A newcomer who stumbles onto an episode just sees a random man shouting a weather report. The faithful fan, watching the same scene, sees an old friend walk back into the room.
The joke on the screen is identical for both of them.
The feeling underneath it is completely different, and that difference is the whole secret. What all of these returning jokes build, slowly and quietly, is a feeling of belonging. To enjoy them at all, a person has to have been around for a while. A first-time viewer cannot feel the warmth of seeing the greaseman slide past again, because for them, there has been no again. The reward is saved for the people who put in the hours, who have heard the weatherman shout before, who remember the baby and the dog's last big trip, who know to brace themselves the very second a character turns and says that here is Conway Twitty. The longer a person watches, the more the show quietly opens itself up to them, until the background stops being background at all and becomes a whole crowd of familiar friends. That slow opening, that steady widening of the joke, is the show's way of paying back loyalty. Step back and look at everything this story has touched, and one machine has been humming underneath all of it. The same show that buried a street sign for sharp eyes to find, that let its characters' eyebrows flicker out in the rush, that hid a joke in the corner of a fake newspaper, that killed its dog and brought him back, that kept a giant chicken alive through every beating, that filled a far-off galaxy with faces borrowed from other cartoons, is the very same show that brings back the weatherman and the greaseman and the long-gone singer, season after season after season. A program that throws away nothing and forgets nothing slowly stops being only a program. Given enough years, it becomes a place. Every hidden thing and every returning face is that place quietly thanking a person for paying attention to it. That is how a careless, error-riddled, often reckless little cartoon became, for so many millions of people, the exact thing they reach for and put on every single night.
The mistakes make it feel human. The hidden jokes make it feel generous. The returning faces make it feel like home. The slips and the secrets and the worn-out gags all pull in the same warm direction, building a world soft and familiar enough to drift off to sleep inside of. So all of it gathers here at the end. The tiny slips and the buried treasures, the dark collisions and the gentle faces that keep coming back. Each piece on its own is
small, a flicker, a sign, a shout, a song. Put together across more than 20 years, they add up to a single, strange and quiet truth about this show, and about why a messy little cartoon of all the careful and polished things on television became the one that people choose to fall asleep to night after night.
If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.